The storm had rolled in without warning, swallowing the small town of Maple Hollow in black clouds and flickering sky. The kind of storm that made people lock their doors early, pull curtains tight, and pretend the wind outside wasn't whispering names they once knew. Beyond the town limits, where the road turned into gravel and the streetlights disappeared, Ravenwood Cemetery waited. It stretched for acres, its old iron gates rusted and bent, its tombstones sinking into wet soil like tired bones. Nobody came there after dark, nobody except Lauren Carter. Her car headlights cut through the fog, catching glimpses of angel statues and cracked headstones as she parked beside the entrance. The wind rattled the chains that once held the gates closed. She stepped out, flashlight in hand, rain soaking through her denim jacket instantly. She shouldn't have come back, but something had been calling her for days in her dreams, in the static of her phone, even in the sound of her washing machine that somehow whispered her brother's name. Eli. He'd been gone for 8 years. Lost in an accident everyone said wasn't her fault, but she'd never believed that. The town's police had found his body near the cemetery fence, his eyes wide open, his skin white as candle wax. The report said heart failure, but she remembered what she'd seen, the mark burned into his wrist, like a twisted symbol. Now she was standing where he died. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the graves like impatient fingers. She moved through the fog, sweeping her flashlight across the graves. The names blurred under the water, but one stood out: Eli Carter, 2004-2017. Someone had left flowers there recently. Fresh, the petals were still red, still wet, but not from rain. From something thicker. Her light trembled as it followed a dark streak that led from his grave toward the willow tree at the edge of the cemetery. The branches swayed slowly, even though the wind had died. Beneath them, the ground was uneven, a mound of dirt freshly disturbed. Her throat tightened. She knelt, brushing the mud away, with shaking hands. There was a wooden box buried halfway, the lid carved with that same twisted symbol. She hesitated. The air turned colder, the rain quieter, almost respectful. When she lifted the lid, a smell like rotting flowers and iron hit her. Inside was a photograph, her and Eli, taken the day before he died, and behind it, a small lock of blonde hair tied with a black ribbon. Her stomach lurched. Then, from somewhere behind her, came the sound of footsteps in the mud. Slow, wet, heavy. She turned sharply, flashlight cutting through the fog, but there was nothing. Just graves, trees, and the sound of her own pulse in her ears. Eli? Her voice cracked. The willow branches moved again, though there was no wind now. From the corner of her eye, she saw something move between the headstones, a figure in gray, half hidden by mist. It wasn't walking, it was gliding. Her light caught it just for a second, enough to see pale skin stretched over a face too thin, eyes glowing faintly blue, lips whispering words she couldn't hear. She stumbled backward, the wooden box slipping from her hands, the photo falling face down into the mud. Then came another sound, a low hum, like a bell ringing underwater. The ground trembled. Water rose from between the graves, black and bubbling, filling the air with the stench of decay. Lauren ran, mud clutching her boots, breath burning in her lungs. But every step she took, the cemetery seemed to stretch longer, wider, like it didn't want to let her go. The gate was gone. The fog was solid now, a wall of white. She turned, and through the haze she saw them, dozens of figures standing between the graves, their heads tilted, their mouths moving silently. The rain stopped. The world went still, and then, in one terrifying instant, all their heads turned toward her at once. Her flashlight shattered as the beam hit their faces she recognized, her classmates, her father, even her brother, eyes open, lips whispering, skin gray. A voice echoed in her head, soft and distant, but clear, as a scream. "You left us here." She stumbled backward, falling into the mud, her hands clutching at the wet ground. The willow branches reached down like hands, wrapping around her shoulders. She screamed, and the fog swallowed the sound completely. Only the hum remained deep, hollow, endless as the rain began again, washing over the disturbed grave. When morning came, the caretaker found her car still parked by the gates, headlights dim, radio playing nothing but static. The gate chains were unbroken. The only sign she'd been there was a muddy footprint leading toward the willow tree, and the photograph lying beside it, now soaked, her brother's face scratched out. Something had woken up in Ravenwood that night, and it wasn't done yet. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It soaked the soil around Ravenwood Cemetery until it turned to black sludge, the kind that swallowed footprints whole and left nothing behind. But the caretaker, Harold Briggs, knew what he'd seen that morning: a single footprint leading from the gate to the willow tree, and the sound of something moving underground when he stepped too close. He'd been working here for 30 years, long enough to know which graves were empty and which weren't. But this one, the one under the willow, felt different. The ground there never froze, even in winter. He'd stopped mowing near it long ago, stopped going near it altogether, until that night when he saw the headlights through the fog and the girl who never came back out. By the time the sheriff's deputy arrived, the rain had turned the cemetery into a swamp. The deputy's boots sank as he walked, his flashlight cutting through the mist. "You sure you saw someone?" he asked, but Harold didn't answer. He was staring at the willow tree, the way its branches trembled even without wind. When the deputy followed his gaze, he swore he saw the ground shift just slightly, as if something was breathing beneath it. The deputy leaned closer, pressing his boot into the mud, and that's when the whisper came, faint, wet, like air being pushed through water. He froze. What was that? Harold's face had gone pale. "Don't move," he murmured, but the deputy didn't listen. He knelt, brushing the mud away from the mound, and saw the edge of something wooden, dark and old. The rain hissed around them. The deputy dug his fingers under it, trying to lift it, and that's when the ground gave way. A hole opened beneath him, deep and sudden. He fell in up to his chest, shouting, clawing at the mud as something cold and slick brushed against his arm. Harold tried to pull him out, but when he grabbed the deputy's hand, it was ice cold. The veins beneath the skin blackened and swelling fast. The deputy's scream echoed through the cemetery, sharp and raw, before cutting off mid-breath. When Harold finally pulled him free, the man's skin had gone gray, his eyes rolled white, his lips whispering words Harold couldn't understand, words that made the air around him tremble. He dropped the deputy's body and stumbled back, tripping over the roots. The willow branches bent low, brushing his shoulders like fingers. He ran then, not stopping until he reached his shack near the gate. Inside, he slammed the door, locked it twice, and lit every lamp he owned. The flickering yellow light filled the small room, revealing photographs, maps, and newspaper clippings tacked to the walls all about Ravenwood. He'd been collecting them for years: missing hikers, drifters, teenagers sneaking in after dark, all gone, no bodies ever found. He'd always known something was buried deep beneath the cemetery, older than the town, older than the graves. He'd found pieces before carvings in stone, symbols on the coffins that didn't belong to any church. But now it was awake again. He could hear it. The whisper hadn't stopped since he left the willow. It filled the air around him, threading through the rain like static, saying his name over and over. That night, Harold didn't sleep. He sat in his chair with a shotgun across his lap, listening. The lamps flickered, the whisper grew louder, and then, for the first time in 30 years, the cemetery bell rang. It hadn't worked since the 1970s. The sound was low and broken, echoing through the storm like a dying heartbeat. He stood slowly, trembling. The bell meant one thing: a burial, but there were no funerals scheduled. No one alive ringing that bell. He stepped outside, the rain hitting his face like ice. The bell hung near the old chapel at the center of the grounds. Its rope swayed gently, though there was no wind now. The sound of it filled the air, deeper and slower with each toll. As Harold approached, he saw candlelight flickering inside the chapel through the broken glass. For a moment, he thought maybe someone else was there. Maybe help. When he opened the chapel door, the air changed. It smelled of earth, mold, and something faintly metallic. Candles lined the altar, each burning low, wax melting into the cracks of the wood. The walls were covered in names carved deep into the plaster, hundreds of them, some old, some fresh, some carved so violently the letters had bled into each other. And there at the center was a photograph nailed to the cross above the altar. Lauren Carter. Her eyes in the picture had been cut out. Harold's breath caught in his throat. He turned to run, but something moved behind him, soft footsteps across the wooden floor. He spun, shotgun raised, but there was no one there, just the sound of breathing, close, right behind him. The candle flames bent sideways as though pushed by invisible hands. The bell outside rang again, louder this time, shaking the whole chapel. He fired blindly into the air, the blast echoing off the walls, the smoke mixing with the rain leaking through the roof. When the echo faded, he heard it the whisper again, now all around him. Layered voices speaking in unison, low and rhythmic. The floorboards under his feet began to pulse, the candles flaring so bright they turned white. He backed toward the door, but the wood had warped, sealing shut. The air thickened, the whispers turned into screams, and through the cracks in the altar he saw it black water seeping upward, carrying with it bones, pieces of faces, the glint of a silver chain. He fell to his knees as the water reached him, soaking his boots, rising fast. In it he saw shapes forming, hands reaching up, mouths open, eyes moving beneath the surface. One of them broke through, pale fingers wrapping around his ankle. He screamed, pulling away, but the grip was strong. He fired again, the sound lost in the storm. The lights went out. When dawn came, the chapel stood silent. The bell hung still. The candles were gone. Only the muddy footprints led back to the willow tree, small, fragile, and barefoot. The police found Harold's cabin empty that morning. The shotgun lay on the floor, barrel bent. The lamps were still on, their light flickering against the window. And carved into the glass, written backwards, were 3 words: "She is waiting." The whisper hadn't stopped. It had just changed voices. The storm rolled in heavier than before, swallowing the sky in shades of bruised gray. By midnight, the road to Ravenwood Cemetery was nothing but a river of mud and broken branches. Sheriff Marla Dwyer gripped the steering wheel tighter as her headlights flickered against the rusted cemetery gate. Dispatch had said the caretaker's line went dead hours ago. When she arrived, his cabin door was wide open, the light inside pulsing weakly, as if trying to breathe. She stepped out into the rain, boots sinking into the wet earth. The wind carried the faint clang of metal, the bell at the chapel again, slow and deliberate, each toll echoing into her bones. Her flashlight sliced through the fog, revealing the half-collapsed graves and leaning stones. The place looked alive, the ground swelling and shifting like something was breathing underneath. The caretaker's shotgun lay in the mud near the path. Next to it, a trail of footprints, not one set, but several, overlapping, barefoot, small, children's feet. They led straight toward the chapel. Marla followed, her breath catching. As the bell grew louder, the chapel door creaked open before she touched it. The air that poured out was colder than winter. Inside, candlelight flickered again, dozens this time, forming a circle around the altar. The photograph of Lauren Carter was still nailed to the cross, but the edges had curled from the damp, and her face looked darker, almost burned. Marla took a cautious step forward. The wooden floor groaned under her boots, wet and swollen. Her eyes darted across the walls, the carved names she'd heard about from old case files. Some she recognized, victims who'd vanished over the last 50 years. But one name near the door made her stomach twist. Harold Briggs, carved deep, blood still wet in the grooves. Lightning flashed through the broken windows, illuminating the chapel for a single instant, and in that moment she saw them. Figures standing between the pews, dozens of them, still, silent, faces pale as chalk, eyes hollow. The rain hissed through the cracks in the roof, dripping onto their shoulders, but none of them moved. They were watching her. Marla raised her flashlight, but the beam trembled in her hand. "Who's there?" Her voice sounded small against the storm. One of the figures turned its head, slow, unnatural, like a puppet being pulled by unseen strings. Its mouth opened. No sound came out. Then another turned, and another, until they were all facing her. She stumbled back, the beam catching on the front row. The first one's face was half decayed, the eyes gone, jaw loose. The second was worse, its chest caved in, skin stretched thin like wax. They weren't alive, not anymore, but their lips were moving, all whispering the same thing, though the words came too soft to hear. Then the bell rang again, and every candle went out at once. Darkness swallowed the room. Marla's flashlight flickered, then died. She froze, listening. The whispers grew louder now, overlapping like 100 mouths speaking through water. The sound came from the floor, from the walls, from inside her own ears. Her heartbeat thundered. In her chest, she reached for her gun, but her fingers were shaking too badly to hold it, and then silence. It was worse than the noise. She could hear only her own breathing, fast and ragged. The smell of rot filled the chapel, thick and wet. She backed toward the door, feeling for the knob. But instead of wood, her hand brushed skin, cold, damp. She turned slowly, and the beam flickered once more, revealing a face inches from hers. A woman, soaked to the bone, eyes wide and black as oil. Mud clung to her skin. Her lips were sewn shut with thread. A low moan escaped from behind the stitches. Marla screamed and fired. The shot lit the room for an instant, and the woman was gone. But now the pews were empty too. Every figure had vanished. The gun smoked in her hand. The bell was still tolling outside, louder, faster. She ran from the chapel, slipping in the mud, nearly falling. The rain poured harder, drowning out her breath. The gate at the far end of the cemetery loomed through the fog. But between her and the exit were the graves open. Every single one of them. Wooden coffins lay cracked and splintered. Bones scattered across the ground like broken glass. The air buzzed with FLIs, though there were none to be seen. She could hear them, that dry, clicking sound that wasn't quite human. The footprints were back. 24 of them this time, circling her, overlapping, moving in the mud, though there was no one there. She raised her light again, desperate, and froze when she saw it, the willow tree. The ground beneath it was no longer a mound but a hole, wide and deep, blacker than the night itself. From inside came the faintest sound, like a child humming. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The humming grew louder, twisting into a song, and then a small hand rose from the hole, gripping the edge. Marlis tumbled backward, firing again and again, the flashes lighting up a nightmare, the ground alive with crawling figures, the graves yawning open as if the earth itself was exhaling its dead. She turned and ran toward the gate, slipping, scraping her hands raw against the wet stone, her lungs burning. The bell still rang behind her, faster now, like a heartbeat out of control. When she reached the gate, she found it chained shut. The lock was old, rusted solid. She pounded on it with her gun, screamed into the storm for help, but there was no one. The humming started again, closer now, right behind her. She turned one last time, and the boy was standing at the edge of the path, mud dripping from his fingers. In his hand he held something small, her badge. He lifted it slowly to his mouth and whispered something into it. The static of a police radio crackled faintly in the distance, though she hadn't touched her radio all night. Then his mouth stretched into a smile too wide for his face. "She's waiting," he whispered in Harold's voice. The wind howled through the cemetery as the gate suddenly creaked open by itself. Marla didn't run. She couldn't. She just stared at the boy, at the graves behind him, at the chapel's faint glow returning through the fog. And for the first time, she realized the bell wasn't calling the dead. It was calling the living. The storm didn't stop. It only got angrier. By dawn, the sky was the color of lead and the air thick with the smell of something burning. Sheriff Marla Dwyer hadn't slept. She sat in her cruiser outside the cemetery, engine off, eyes locked on the open gate. Her uniform was still wet, mud caked into her sleeves, and her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The dispatcher had called her 5 times through the night. She didn't answer once, because what could she possibly say? That the dead had sung to her? That a boy with hollow eyes had spoken in her deputy's voice? When the first light touched the gravestones, it revealed something new, dozens of footprints leading out of the cemetery and across the road into the woods. Barefoot, small. She stepped out, gun drawn, following the trail as fog crawled low through the trees. The forest was still except for the dripping rain and the soft hum of velais. The ground squished under her boots. Somewhere deeper, a faint sound like whispering through water drifted between the trunks. She reached a clearing after 10 minutes. The fog here was thicker, hanging low like smoke from a fire that hadn't gone out. In the center stood an old stone well, half collapsed, covered in moss and roots. The footprints ended there, circling the well's rim before vanishing into the mud. Marla stepped closer, her flashlight trembling as she leaned over the edge. Darkness. Then, faintly, the sound of voices. A hum, rising and falling like a hymn. It wasn't wind, it was music. Children's voices, soft and hollow, echoing from below. She pulled back, shaking her head. No, not again. But the humming grew louder. She turned to leave and stopped. The trees behind her were moving, not from wind, from something. Brushing past them, branches cracking, leaves rustling, shapes between the trunks. She lifted her gun, heart hammering in her ears. "Show yourself." No one did. But the humming shifted, it was above her now. She looked up. Hanging from the branches were dolls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, old and soaked, strung with fishing line. Some missing heads, some missing eyes. Their clothes were tattered, their faces smeared with something dark that looked too much like dried blood. And every single one of them was moving, swinging gently in rhythm to the sound coming from the well. Then one of them turned, slowly, its head twisting on its string until its face faced her. Its mouth opened, splitting at the seams, and a single voice whispered through the clearing, "Come back." Marla tumbled backward, tripping over a root. Her flashlight fell, beam spinning wildly. The dolls began to sway faster now, their glass eyes clicking together like teeth. The humming grew deeper, almost mechanical, vibrating in the ground beneath her. The well started to shake. Cracks spread through the stone, and something inside it began to glow a dull red, like burning coal. The ground around it pulsed as if alive. Then came the first scream. It wasn't human. It tore through the trees, a sound of something buried too long. The light flared, and Marla saw them, hands, dozens of them, reaching up from inside the well, gray, rotted fingers, bones exposed, nails black and sharp. The children's voices blended into one endless note that made her vision blur. She turned and ran, crashing through the trees, mud splashing her legs, rain cutting across her face. When she looked back, she saw the well split open, collapsing in on itself. The red light exploded outward, swallowing the clearing in a wave of smoke and ash. She didn't stop running until she saw her cruiser again through the trees. But when she reached it, something wasn't right. The headlights were on, the engine running, and in the driver's seat, someone was sitting. She raised her gun and shouted, "Step out!" No response. She circled the car, breath short, and froze when she saw the face pressed against the glass. It was Harold Briggs. His eyes were open, black as tar, mouth smiling too wide. Blood dripped from his ears and nose, soaking his collar. His hand was gripping the radio mic, and through the static she heard her own voice recorded. From earlier that night, whispering, "She's waiting." Her stomach turned. She reached for the handle but stopped when she saw the passenger seat. A small shape sat there. A child, the same boy from the cemetery. He looked at her and smiled. Then he lifted the mic to his lips and whispered something into it. The radio crackled again, repeating his voice through every frequency. "The choir is ready." The sound echoed across the hills, faint and distant. Marla backed away, her mind screaming to leave, to run, to forget this place existed. But before she could move, the boy vanished, gone in the blink of an eye, and Harold's head slumped forward against the wheel. The radio went silent. Then her headlights flickered and died. She stood there in the dark rain, breathing hard, until a new sound replaced the static. The church bell, the same one from the chapel, tolling, slow and heavy in the distance. Only now it wasn't alone. Dozens of smaller bells joined it, faint but clear, coming from all directions, the sound of the dead calling to one another. She looked toward the cemetery gate. In the fog, she saw shapes again, moving between the graves, but they weren't wandering anymore. They were marching toward the woods, toward her. Marla jumped into her cruiser, turned the key, but the engine coughed and died. Panic clawed at her throat. The shapes were closer now, silhouettes in the headlights, hundreds of them, their faces hidden in shadow. Some dragged shovels, some carried ropes, others held nothing but broken lanterns that flickered with ghostly blue flame. She locked the doors, hands gripping the wheel. Her breath fogged the glass. And then one by one they stopped walking. Every figure turned its head toward her, and at the same time every bell stopped ringing. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. Then something tapped against her window. Once, twice. She turned slowly. The boy was standing there, smiling, rain dripping from his hair. He lifted his hand, and she saw that it wasn't a hand anymore. It was a mass of gray flesh, bones and wires tangled together, pulsing like a heartbeat. He pressed it against the glass, and the metal of the cruiser groaned. Cracks spread through the window, spiderwebbing outward. Then his voice came again, calm, almost sweet. "She's still waiting." Before Marla could react, the radio came to life once more. But this time it wasn't static, it was a song, the same one she'd heard from. The well, soft, slow, beautiful in the worst way. The choir, children's voices rising through the static, singing in perfect unison. The sound filled the car, filled her head, drowning everything else. The boy stepped back into the fog, fading from view as the dead behind him began to move again, this time toward the chapel. Marla's hand trembled on the ignition, her pulse pounding in her ears. She didn't know what terrified her more, the sound of the song or the feeling that she already knew the words. And then, from somewhere deep in the woods, the bell rang again, a final warning. She turned the key, the engine roared to life, tires spun in the mud. She drove, headlights cutting through the fog, but no matter how far she went, the song didn't stop. It followed her through the trees, through the storm, whispering just behind the glass, and she realized it wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from the back seat. The rain stopped just before dawn, but the silence it left behind was worse than the storm. Sheriff Marla Dwyer's cruiser rolled to a slow stop on the hill overlooking Ravenwood Cemetery. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her hands still trembling on the steering wheel. The song had gone quiet at last, but its echo remained a soft hum, like something breathing just behind her. She turned off the headlights. The world outside was drenched in silver fog, the horizon fading into nothing. In the distance, the chapel's broken steeple cut through the mist like a blade. She stepped out, boots sinking into the wet ground, gun drawn but useless in her shaking hand. Every instinct told her to leave, but she knew she couldn't. Not after everything she'd seen. The dead children, the boy, the well, all of it pointed back here. To the chapel, to whatever was buried beneath it. The air grew colder as she approached. The grass was heavy with dew and streaked with trails of mud, as if something had crawled across it during the night. The chapel door was open, swaying gently in the wind, its hinges squealing. Inside, the candles were still burning, though no one had been here since the massacre in 1978. Their flames didn't flicker, they just burned steady, colorless, too bright. Marla stepped inside. The pews were overturned, the altar cracked in half, and the crucifix on the wall hung upside down. The smell hit her, then mold, rust, and the faint sweetness of decay. Her radio hissed once on her belt, then went dead. She pulled it off, tried again, nothing but static. Then she saw it, a message carved into the altar wood, the letters jagged and raw, as if scratched by nails. The choir must sing. Her heart sank. The words weren't new. They were the same phrase from the old case files from the night the Ravenwood orphanage burned down 47 years ago. The same night the children vanished. No bodies were ever found. Just this sentence carved into the orphanage walls. Marla's flashlight flickered. When it came back, something had changed. The pews weren't empty anymore. Children sat in them, dozens of them. Still pale, soaked, their heads tilted down, their hands folded neatly in their laps. None moved, none breathed. At the front stood the boy, the same one from the cemetery, the same one from her car. His eyes gleamed like candlelight. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice sounded too small in the vast silence. "What do you want?" The boy smiled, his lips trembling as if trying to remember how. "We want to go home." And then the ground beneath the altar began to move. The tiles cracked, splitting open in a slow, shuddering grind. Dust filled the air. Something beneath was pushing upward, something massive. The children lifted their heads in perfect unison, their mouths opening as the sound began again. That haunting, beautiful hum. The choir. Marla backed away, but her feet refused to move fast. Enough. The sound wasn't coming from their throats, it was coming from below them. The altar shattered. From the hole below rose a figure. Not a man, not fully human. A priest's vestments clung to its body, rotted and torn. Its face was a blur of flesh and shadow. Its eyes burned black. A rosary of teeth hung from its neck, and its hands, skeletal, veined with ash, reached toward the ceiling. Father Jonas. Marla breathed, remembering the name from the case file. The orphanage priest, the man who vanished the night of the fire. The thing turned its head toward her, and its mouth split open into a smile that stretched too wide. Its voice was soft, calm, like a sermon. "You opened the gate, Sheriff. You called them back." The children's song grew louder, the sound vibrating in her bones. The pews shook, the candles flared, burning blue. Marla tumbled backward, covering her ears, but the melody crawled inside her head. Images flashed before her eyes, children locked in basements, fire swallowing wood, hands reaching through smoke. Father Jonas standing at the pulpit, preaching as the walls burned. "They will sing for me," he'd said. "They will live forever in my voice." Marla screamed, firing her gun, bullet staring through the priest's form, but instead of blood, black smoke poured out. The children didn't stop singing. Their eyes were glowing now, each one a small white flame. Jonas raised a hand, and the smoke surged toward her, wrapping around her throat. "You shouldn't have come here alone," he whispered. "Ravenwood needed its shepherd." She fell to her knees, gasping, her vision blurred. But in the corner of her eye, she saw something glinting on the floor, the sheriff's badge she'd dropped hours earlier. Her hand crawled toward it, fingers trembling. When she touched it, the hum in her ears cracked for a second. She could hear something else. A heartbeat. Hers. She clenched the badge tight, forcing herself to stand. "You used them," she rasped. "You used the kids." Jonas tilted his head, voice dripping with mock sorrow. "They were never mine. They were hers." The church doors slammed shut. Every window shattered inward. A wind tore through the room, scattering ashes and pages from hymnals. From behind the altar, something else began to rise, a figure taller than the ceiling itself, made of shadows and bone, with dozens of faces shifting across its surface. It was the thing behind Jonas, the real puppeteer, the mother of the choir. Its voice wasn't a sound, it was a vibration that cracked the air. "Sing," the children obeyed. Their voices rose so high the glass liquefied. Marla covered her ears, tears streaking her face, as the light poured from their mouths in streams of white fire, converging toward the creature. The chapel walls twisted, wood bending like wax. The crucifix melted. She saw her chance, stumbling toward the altar. She grabbed one of the candles, its flame pure white, and hurled it into the hole from which the darkness had crawled. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the ground exploded in light. The scream that followed wasn't human. It shattered every window for miles. The children vanished, the priest dissolved, and the chapel caught fire from the inside out. Marla was thrown backward through the doorway, rolling down the muddy hill as flames devoured the sky. When she opened her eyes, it was morning. Smoke rose from where the chapel had been, now just a black crater in the earth. No bodies, no song, just the echo of wind through burned trees. She stood slowly, her uniform torn, her skin streaked with soot. For a long time she said nothing. Then she turned toward her cruiser and began walking. Her radio was dead, but as she reached for it, a faint hum came through like the last note of a lullaby. Her hand froze. The voice was small, soft, familiar. "We're home now." She dropped the radio, watching it fall into the dirt. The hum stopped. Marla turned toward the horizon. In the fog, the silhouette of the chapel was visible again, untouched, whole, its bell tower gleaming. She blinked. It wasn't there anymore. Only the whisper of children laughing in the wind, and then silence. Somewhere beneath the ashes of Ravenwood, the choir kept singing because the dead never forget the ones who promised to listen.